Good evening and welcome to Ruvheneko Online. We are live to you from Borrowdale in Harare, and we've been coming to you on different platforms. We've been in the studio at Cappy Talk, in the studio at Star FM, and I've had some people asking me, Ruvheneko, what's happened to the online show? What's going on? Since you started at Zim Papers, you've neglected us. That is not true. I actually miss you so much. And this Thursday, we brought you this program live, as was always our appointment together. But don't worry, things are back in place, and we'll be back with more programming just for you right here every Thursday at 7 p.m. Tonight, we are discussing the Voices of Zimbabwe. Now, they're an organization that's come together, and they've been doing polling since, I think, further back beyond November 2017, but significantly from that point. If you go onto their website, you'll find a few polls that they've conducted. In essence, what we're discussing tonight is how relevant polls are in deciding, number one, the vote, and in being able to put together the thoughts of Zimbabweans in understanding where we're at. Now, the analysis of this is something like maybe polls don't really speak to what's happening on the ground. How many Zimbabweans on the ground are connected to the internet, for example? Because that's how you contribute to the poll, and anyone can contribute to the poll. So the question is, how valid are their statistics? Is it us urbanites who are able to connect to our phones, who have data, who have Wi-Fi, who they are hearing their thoughts from? Or is it everybody? And if it's not everybody, should we still take them as valid? So that's what we're discussing tonight. But they've done some interesting polls and, talked about where our moods are at since, November. There's one they did in December asking them, how do you feel now? And amongst them were words like optimistic, fearful, hopeful, concerned. And all these things are really supposed to help us as Zimbabweans know where we are at collectively. We don't always know how we're thinking. Social media gives us sentiments, right? When you're on Twitter, when you're on Facebook, based on the comments and likes and retweets, you can gauge where people are at. But they've taken it upon themselves to make it an official platform where they get as official statistics as they can. And you can join in on that. There's an email address you can email to be part of this poll. It's yourvoicezw@gmail.com. Now, I've got the founder of that here with me, and she's helping them run this, and obviously very passionate about it. And she came to me and presented this, and I thought, you know what? This is exciting. And one of their partners is RAU, and we've got both of them in studio tonight. They're going to talk us through how they've been working and how this is going to work toward 2018's general elections. So let me welcome, please, to the panel. We have Tony Reeler from Research and Advocacy Unit. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
I believe we've sat down together before a few years ago. Completely different setting, completely different topic.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back. And then we have Ms. Upenyu Muchemwa, and she is from Voices of Zimbabwe.
Yes,
Welcome.
I am. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Me.
Thanks for bringing this platform.
Thank you for listening.
Now let's get Zimbabwe to listen. Now the great thing about this platform is that we have Zimbabweans both outside and inside of Zimbabwe. And those outside obviously appreciate this idea of polling because they know what it's like. You watch the British elections, you watch the US elections, the French elections, and a lot of it is based on that. But interestingly enough, we had the elections where Hillary Clinton lost twice.
Oh,
and the polls said something completely different to what the outcome of the election was.
Yes.
So we want to know from you, how much value do you place on this polling? Write to us now, talk to us on Facebook, on Twitter. We're listening and we're live and we're here. We also have a live audience who's here and they're going to be participating later on in the conversation. So let's start with you, Upenyu, as Voices of Zimbabwe. Tell us about this platform and how we should look forward to participating in it and using it to understand the mood of Zimbabweans.
Okay. So I'm not the founder. I'm, the wheel and the cogs behind Voices of Zimbabwe. But it was a great idea, and I really loved the notion of asking Zimbabweans what it is that they're thinking and feeling and where it is that they think the country is going, because I don't think that happens often enough. How it started was basically November presented Zimbabweans with a moment in time in which they had the ability to be a part of shaping the national narrative. So the past 37 years, the national narrative has been largely given to us, and you've either bought in or you've been excluded from it. But it was a time for us to be able to say, okay, this is our story. This is who we are as Zimbabweans. This is the history that we believe in, and this is the future that we want. Mm-hmm. And so Voices of Zimbabwe is, a small part of trying to be, listening to people, understanding what they want, and then also talking back to them. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the time, polling processes or surveys are transactional. So you give me your opinion, and then I give it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we're actually feeding it back to the respondent pool. So we have a consistent pool of people. It's the same people answering the same questions. So that's how we're able to track over time their change in mood about politics or economics and about the country in general.
Well, they say that a research is not anything greater than its sample. So who are these people?
There are people from all over the country.
Okay.
We have 28% from Harare. We have 1% from, I believe it's Mat North.
Okay.
We have 5% from Mashingo and so forth. So it's an even distribution that's actually reflected in the bigger population statistics.
Okay. Exciting. And tell us about your role as research and advocacy unit, Tony, in this really important and interesting, it's wonderful that this is coming out now. I mean, this new dispensation word that's been thrown around has been birthing so many things that never existed before. I don't know why we couldn't test our mood before and research our behavior and our thoughts beforehand and publicize it the way that you have.
Well, Rao's interest is in citizens and citizen agency. So political science defines agency as voice and participation. And I think you would say about Zimbabweans, in the words of one eminent scientist, we're voters but not citizens. In other words, we vote, but you don't see much about Zimbabweans doing anything else. The statistics, particularly from the Afrobarometer, we work very closely with the Mass Public Opinion Institute on this work. You find Zimbabweans are very, very diffident activists. They belong to a church, but they don't belong to a community group, and they don't join, they don't attend community meetings. And one of the most startling statistics that we've been watching over all these years is a question the Afrobarometer asked. They asked the question, are you concerned to express your view in public? And well over 85% of Zimbabweans consistently say, yep, I'm very worried about expressing our view in public. So what we were interested in this idea is that polling is often very static. So the Afrobarometer, for example, comes along every 2 years. They've done 7 polls since '99. And they ask a huge number of questions that are really very relevant, but they're transactional in a sense, as opinion says. We collect the data, we put it out, and mostly what people do with it is they just look to see who's more popular, Team A or Team B. But there's an enormous amount of information in it that's useful, and it indicates that citizens aren't very active. So the idea of creating a platform that was dialogical, where we had lots of people getting interested in it, and even beginning to frame the questions themselves. Like, people might write in and say, I really want to know whether Zimbabweans think elections are a good thing or not. And then we'd say, okay, that's a good idea. Let's put that question out to everybody. Do you think elections are a good thing or not? So it's to begin to create a dialogue of a completely different kind. Not a static thing that happens every 2 years, but something that's really vibrant and expressing ordinary people's. So we felt that this was a very good initiative, and we like to do the 9 decimal point science if you want. But this is different. This is for me, it's about activism, and it's about getting citizens to be much more engaged in the process.
I like this. And one thing that they did, if you go to their website, like I said, one of the polls they conducted is they said the top concerns of Zimbabwean people, right? And I took a screen capture of that, and some of the areas in Zimbabwe that we are apparently most concerned about, and this was done in 2009, in 2012, 2014, and 2017. So I've just taken the most popular aspects of Zimbabwean life that we are raising as our biggest concerns. And as you guessed, obviously, one of the first ones is unemployment, which has been consistent throughout the years. And then not as much in 2009 as it was in 2012 up until today. And then there was the management of the economy. Now this one is again consistent from 2012 until now. And then there's food shortage. And then there's wages, incomes and salaries. Then there's water supply. And then there's education. And some of these things, you look at them and you talk about what the UN is doing with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of these things that we are concerned about in Zimbabwe show just how third world we are. They show just how backward we are, how the basic things are the things we're still clamoring for. But going into the 2018 elections, my question to you who's watching is, what do you want? Out of your new leadership, what is the top priority that you feel our new leadership needs to place on the lives of Zimbabweans? And I think these kinds of things are what these polls are the kinds of things that I think even politicians should pay attention to, because it helps them. It should help them guide their manifestos and their campaigns and their strategies to be able to know what Zimbabweans are thinking. So help us, Zimbabwe, wherever you are, whether you're in the diaspora or you're local, let us know what's top of mind for you right now as a key area for Zimbabwe and what politicians must pay most attention to. Tell us about your involvement with political parties. Is this something that you will present to them, or are you just going to exist and then whoever uses it, uses it?
I think the idea was really not to be political party or elections and stuff like that. It was to really try and find out. You've just raised what Zimbabweans' concerns are, right? So, we want jobs. We'd like to know what kind of jobs. I mean, it's very easy. You ask a question, what are your top priorities? Those are from the Afrobarometer. So tell us what are the top priorities, jobs, unemployment, blah, blah, blah. You tick box it. I want to know what kind of jobs they want. 70% of the population's under the age of 35. Do they want to do the same jobs as their parents, or are they going to be techies? Do they want government to start working on IT type stuff? We're talking about mines. Are they interested in mines, or are they interested in developing something else? So those kinds of surveys don't allow you to unpack that stuff. So this, we can go back and say, what kind of job? Right? Or what does unemployment mean?
Sure.
Well, also looking at the findings from the report, you find that there's a really high negative correlation between politics and mood. So people are saying things like hopeless, they're saying hectic, they're saying sad, they're saying desperate when it comes to political questions. And that speaks to the issue of apathy. I think consistently over the past, how many elections? Since the beginning, maybe we've faced the issue of voter apathy. We're not having the same number of registered voters voting in every election. It's a small percentage who are voting. And I think those are the issues that are affecting them most. Who do I vote for? How do I vote? What am I voting for when I choose a political party? And I think those are, when it comes to jobs and unemployment, those are perennial issues. Those are the issues that are really deep-seated, because that speaks to how you provide for your family and how you live in your daily life.
Okay, if you've just tuned in, you're watching Ruvheneko Online, and we'll be back in a few moments. We are discussing polling in Zimbabwe through Voices of Zimbabwe and through Research and Advocacy Unit. So we are going to be right back with you shortly, so stay tuned and don't go anywhere.
As Pastor G, I've realized one thing. Air conditioning is critical. I spend a lot of time in my car, driving from performances, driving to rehearsal, doing TV interviews. As Pastor G, I've realized one thing. Air conditioning is critical. I spend a lot of time in my car, driving from performances, driving to rehearsal, doing TV interviews, radio interviews, and just going around the business of music. And I've realized the value of good, clean, cool air conditioning. And I'm telling you, Pro Air has come in big time. And they service. I had an accident a couple of weeks ago, and my air conditioning unit was damaged badly. But Pro Air came in, stepped in, fixed it for me. And now I've got good, cool, clean weather in my car. Ne Pro Air, makeke. We make the weather behave.
Welcome back to Ruvheneko Online. Tonight we're discussing polling in Zimbabwe. We've got Voices of Zimbabwe and Research and Advocacy Unit. And I've got with me Tony Rila and Upenyu Muchemwa. And we've just been talking about what it is that Voices Zimbabwe is doing, the kind of polling that they're doing. And it's been clear that it's not necessarily a political move. It's something that is just supposed to be able to gauge the temperature and the mood of Zimbabweans. This information can be used by anybody. It can be used by researchers, can be used by authors, philosophers, politicians, business people, corporates, anybody, because in essence, you need to know where our minds are. And we've been talking about who these people are, who the actual sample, the actual people are who contribute to this poll. And it's anybody who registered to the website and who registered on the email address, basically. There's a series of questions that you answer, and your input can be put in there. So as I said, tonight we're live. We've got a live audience, and we're going to get a few questions from them and a few comments. But before we do that, just to bring together everything we've been discussing now from this point. Going into, as you said, the purpose of this poll, saying that it's for anybody and everybody. But one thing that we can't avoid, of course, is the 2018 elections that we're going into. And I'm curious to know from your research, what are Zimbabweans saying and feeling right now? There was the euphoria of November. Yeah. Are people still on that, or has it kind of faded?
The euphoria has definitely faded. So, with the euphoria, it was overwhelmingly Zimbabweans wanted Mugabe to go. Overwhelmingly, they were excited that we could unite and be peaceful, and we could do this really great thing together. But following the current president's trip to Davos and just watching what has been going on in the country, it feels like it's a little bit of a letdown, because I think the expectation was that the country would change overnight, right? But the reality doesn't match the expectation.
So this 100 days, I mean, there's been different reviews of this. There's been that from the OPC, from the president himself, and, positive aspects that have come out of what he has achieved in 100 days. Then on the other hand, there were all those memes and comments that came out saying he's achieved nothing. So my question is, have you done a poll yet since within these 100 days to say, what are Zimbabweans thinking? Are they believing still in President Mnangagwa and where he's taking the country, or have they sort of fallen off that wagon? What's the sentiment?
We haven't exactly asked that question, but what we do have is a series of questions, asked over time. So this report is over the first 3 series. So it's just generally asking you, how do you feel about the country this week? And coming from the euphoria of the march, it's generally going in a more positive direction. But they are, when people then explain to us why they feel the way they feel. Why do they tell us that they feel desperate, for instance? And that points to things like, it hasn't changed the way I thought it was going to change.
What were people hoping for, to be honest?
Nirvana.
In 100 days, I mean, there have been sort of explanations and analysis of how do you expect one man to change Zimbabwe in 100 days, given where Zimbabwe was? What did people really want?
Well, you go back to the point you were making earlier.
Right.
Ruvheneko. Since 1999, Zimbabweans have focused on livelihood and livelihood issues. I mean, in the 90s, through ESAP, life got tougher and tougher and tougher, and it got tougher and tougher and tougher, and it's maintained tougher. So Zimbabweans have a real preoccupation with their personal concerns, right? I mean,
me, my family, and myself.
Right. Because that's what they're dealing with every single day. The unemployment figures, we know how high they are. So, you excuse Zimbabweans if they're a little cautious, right, about expecting enormous change, right? Or not cautious, that's the wrong word. Being concerned that the things don't move as fast as the expectations were.
Because they've been let down so many times. Sure. They're just like, look, Right. I'm curious to know from you, and Jeff is going to help me see some of your comments on Facebook now in a moment, but I know you've got your live comments coming in through to us, so keep them coming through, because we want to know where your head is at right now. After November, this is March now, Zimbabwe. It's been about 3.5 months and it is since that march happened, and we've got different words for the march, of course. There's the one that can't be named, which starts with a C. There's one that has been now termed for all of us being the new dispensation. By your definition, and start with that as a word, maybe just, and you start in your comment. And tell us what you're thinking now regards where we are and what your expectations of the new regime are. And are you just actually waiting for elections to happen so you can have your say? Or did your voice get heard enough in November? Curious to hear that. But we also want to come to our live audience. And I know they've got some contributions. So I'm going to hand over now so that we can get some of those comments coming in and get the feedback from our audience. That's why they're here today and they're here to contribute. So the mic is there. So please do come up and ask your question or make your comment. And we can get this show on the road. Okay. Once you've decided who's coming first, of course. Honor, ladies? Yes. Okay. No, they're going to come up here, please. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Hi, awesome. Thanks.
You can face the... Exactly.
Where am I facing there?
Yes.
Okay. I'm speaking to the people. It seems weird sort of asking my question to you guys, but looking there. But no, I think it's a really awesome platform and idea, to really start hearing the voices. So I think my first question would just be, it would be great to hear a little bit more of what is the content of some of the questions and the answers, and what are the main trends that you're seeing coming through on this platform in terms of what people are thinking.
Thank you. Thank you so much. He was on my show 2 weeks ago. We had a great chat. And there's a question for you saying, some of the questions that have been asked already, let's hear what the questions are and what some of the answers are.
Okay, so the first set of questions we asked was, what was it? What do you think would make your Christmas better?
Okay.
Overwhelmingly, it was the issue of cash. So I think it was 50 to 60% of our respondents said I would like to get my money out of the bank, maybe. Just to have a better Christmas. And then the next set we asked, what are you planning to do this year? And among the answers we got, I want to start my own business. I plan to register to vote. I want to be more active in my community. So it's registering to vote was actually a very small, a very small percent of our answers. But most people wanted to be more engaged in their community. Most people wanted to start a business. Most people wanted to find jobs even. And then after that, we asked people about the media. Where do you find news? What makes you trust news? And what makes you share it amongst your networks,
right? And also I saw one that asked about the credible source of news. Yes, where you asked where most people get their credible source of information, and a lot of it was radio, news, and television. Yes, newspapers and television. Yes. Interestingly enough, obviously in this era of citizen journalism, where we now rely on each other. Some people now say, okay, if I haven't heard it from this group, then it's not legit. Yes. What are we doing about that going into this era? I mean, come on, guys. I mean, without WhatsApp, half of us would not even know who the new government is. Exactly. Or, so what are we saying about this, especially in your line of work?
I think that's more a reflection of what happened during I don't even know what to call it, the military intervention.
What do you call it?
I call it the military intervention because I saw trucks, tanks, on the street.
The military intervention, okay.
But because there was so much news circulating, and you remember at one point it was being shared who the new cabinet was going to be, and it was even on SABC News, and that was just a rumor. The cabinet at that point had not even been announced. Exactly. Yeah. And so I think it's a reflection back on what had happened in November, that this is where these are the sources of news that I trust.
But fake news didn't start in November.
No.
I mean, I think that's because November happened, therefore, WhatsApp is a source of information. Yes. Because
but you remember WhatsApp broke the news first. And then news? You heard it. In November. It always broke the news first.
I guess it depends. Always. In November, actually, it did not. In November, remember, at 4 a.m., ZBC broke the news first.
True.
Did you know what I mean? Yes. And then thereafter, it became an issue of, if it's not on ZBC, it's not true. It's not real. Yes. Right? It's not happening. Tony, what's your input on that?
What do you mean, on the coup or the whatever else happened?
on the sources
Look, on
of
the media
information.
thing, on the media is very important because there's huge amounts of sharing on WhatsApp. It's the, WhatsApp, Facebook, all this stuff is huge. But where's the platform that people can go to begin to exchange views that might be based on some kind of credibility? Even if the credibility is hearing what 60% of us, all of us coming to Voices Zimbabwe, saying, well, we all think that we're not terribly interested in politics and we're very negative about these things and we're much more interested in more personal issues. Well, if you create a space in which all that Twitter, everything else, begins to flow into one particular place, it becomes a basis for people sharing. The rest of it is random, isn't it? I don't know if Ruvheneko sends me something, do I trust the northern suburbs or do I trust something that comes out of Mbale, right? Northern suburbs is full of rumor.
Yeah.
Other places are not full of rumor. So I don't know what to do. So what we're trying to do is to create a dialogical space where people might suddenly get a feeling that at least what they were saying and sharing with each other was reliable about what people themselves felt. Okay. External events, that's really difficult. Okay.
Sure.
And I think, what we're finding is actually what the Afrobarometer is finding, is that interestingly, the interest in a lot of the traditional forms of media is dropping and dropping and dropping. Now, that may be an economic factor, but it's also the case that newer forms, like the internet and like social media, they're growing. So the basis for information is beginning to change. And I think that's where citizens' voice is now
Get heard. But we need to be more responsible as citizens. I think this is a thing that we need to really address. And I know we've got some lawyers in the house today. And I think just on a level of ethics and being, reliable amongst ourselves. Sometimes we get caught up in the hype and all these jokes that go around. I mean, the jokes, guys. I mean, I've been part of that myself. I believe I was running for a party, a few weeks ago, or was it a few months ago? And there's a point where, you're like, look, there's got to be lines, But we've got some comments coming in on Facebook. Some of your comments. This is Grace Redzo says 100 days day, and yet he had 37 years to advise fully to former President Robert Mugabe, being vice president and lawyer. Shada, right? So there's a comment there saying, look, shall we give, the president these 100 days as though he's starting afresh? But some people are looking at it like that. Are you looking at President Mnangagwa's 100 days as his 100 days, starting afresh as the president? Do you feel he had no voice before? Or are you thinking that it's a continuation of where we've just come from? Let us know your thoughts there. A comment here from Grace again. She says, the ZANU-PF slogan says, get on board or get out of the way. Pretty simple. And then another comment from Cam Mahane says, Aiwa taneta kumirira velue. All right. So we have different views there on where we're at, right? And in essence, I want to know what areas you're willing to get into. Because I push for the political aspect because it is election season. And you might want to go all frilly and ask all these life questions and existential questions. But at the end of the day, Zimbabweans want a poll that tells them that, look, Chamisa versus Mnangagwa. Let's get down to it.
Well, the big question, when you raised it, right across Africa, for example, the youth are voting less and less and less. Right? It's a massive trend. Zimbabwe is no different. You have to ask the question, do they care about elections? Now, that is a very important question.
Well, 5 million do. Because they're registered.
They're registered. But lots of people have always registered and the poll has always been lower. And we've never been able to show what the base rate is. Right? I've watched lots of elections. So you never know, because we've had lots of fights about the voters' roll. But the point, the more interesting democratic question about citizens is, from our perspective, of course it matters to everybody whether Team A and Team B and Team C and person A and Y, X and Y are more popular than everyone else. There are those traditional polls. They always get done. They get done before the election. They'll tell you whether Morgan was more popular than Robert or Robert was more popular than Morgan. They do that.
Yes.
But that tells you about people's preferences for voting. It doesn't tell you the deeper questions that they're wanting about. What's the point of elections? Right? We had the same party in power for 37 years. What do people think about that? is that because of elections or because people don't care? What is it? We want to get away from the purely political questions to start getting at what you might call the affective base of people. What do they think, feel? They're different issues. And yes, it's a polling period, but we're pretty sure that the other polling people are going to go and do this stuff.
Right.
We'd rather get on
You
the
want to
side.
focus on the other stuff.
Yeah. But I would also caution
yeah.
you against, do you remember in 2013, the Afrobarometer poll that put Morgan against Mugabe, and it had Morgan winning an election and then he lost the election. So it can sometimes be misleading, and it's not necessarily the best indicator, because I do think that it's a moment in time, not necessarily a period, or measuring over a period like what we're doing. So it's not taking, how can I put it, the change in mood. It's just saying Mugabe or Morgan. You know what I mean? And that's not necessarily a good indication of what an election result will be.
I don't think any poll will really predict an election.
No, it's never accurate. I think we've seen this as a global trend.
No.
It's just, I think it's something that people have analyzed as well, say it's a money-making gimmick, that those that are conducting the polls, those conducting the polls use it to make a quick buck. And it also just sensationalizes things. It gets things going, you know what I mean? It gets people like, oh, okay, cool, all right, I'm part of something and this is exciting, all right, you know? I don't know if it's really...
Well, I mean, you know, sometimes polls are absolutely accurate. You know, they're you know, somebody's going. You predict the ANC are going to win the South African election. I bet they do.
Right.
Right. So it depends on particular circumstances, but in a sense, polling is not only about who wins over an election. I mean, it's a very narrow interest for polls. I mean,
No, I think we understand the full scope. Why I was emphasizing the politics is because it's 2018.
Yeah.
All right? Yeah. We've come out of November and we're heading toward an election. It's that simple. Zimbabweans have become very politicized. You can't take that away. Very polarized. Everything we do, think, see, eat, feel has got to do with elections right now. That's the bottom line. But we've got some comments here on Facebook. This is Tirivashe Mudondo says, how does gauging the national mood help in formulating a position and path for the country? If that narrative is going to change in such frequent graphs. From 18 November to today alone, the national mood has been on a free dance. On a free dance.
It's just been...
Yeah, you know?
Yeah, I mean, what you would say about this election, right? And I can see why pollsters might really get frightened about it. It is the most complicated election I think we've faced in 37 years.
Why do you say that?
We had a two-horse race pretty much from 2000 and onwards. It was MDC versus ZANU-PF. What happened? You've got MDC, you've got Joyce Mujuru, splits from Joyce Mujuru. You've got at least three factions of ZANU-PF. It looks to me like G40 just entered the battle in some way. What on earth is going on? So I'm a citizen looking at this thing, and I might go, a plague on all their houses. What's the point?
It's a circus.
It's a circus.
Tell us what you're thinking. Of course, we are still live with you right now on Ruvheneko Online. We end at 8 o'clock, and we've got a few more minutes left to discuss with you what your thoughts are on Zimbabwe going forward. What are your thoughts on polling for our country, given the sentiments and where we are now? And what are also your thoughts on the current contenders? Tony just brought an interesting point. Although there are over 5 million of us registered, how many of us are actually going to go and vote? Because some of us might sit at home and say, you know what? Out of the options that are there, none of them speak to me. None of them speak to my future. So this is what we want to understand from you now. Where are your thoughts right now? Are you convinced that the current leaders that are rising are the ones that are actually going to be able to win you over? Are they actually people that you consider? Is it still a two-horse race? Or some of these other parties actually people to consider. But as I said, now we've got our live audience, and we're going to give them an opportunity again to come and participate, so that we can get the conversation going, not just amongst ourselves, but also with you and our audience. If there's any questions, please do come forward and ask your question or make your contribution. So yeah, we don't want backbenchers. I mean, I assume that anyone who comes to the live audience has genuine contributions to make. So please don't be shy and get involved. And while we're waiting for that participation, just so that we can understand as well, in the different screenshots that I looked at and the different areas of focus for RAL and for Voices of Zimbabwe, one thing that we do want to know as well is consumers, right? What are people consuming? you know, in terms of where their concerns are and affordability and where their lifestyle and focus is. Because we know obviously there's the basic needs, right? We look at some of the samples, they talk about water, talk about jobs, talk about food shortages. But in terms of everything else and the patterns, the behavioral daily patterns of the Zimbabwean, what have you picked up?
It's very peculiar about how uninterested people are in that. You know,
Okay.
Rao did a little survey when the vendor crisis was on, about 2 years ago. And when we just did a snap survey, we went to the street and asked vendors, you know, what are you doing, who are you, how much do you make, and stuff like that. And when we went and looked for research, nobody was doing any research on the vendors at all. And we see that as one of our most downloaded reports. People go to that, and it's 2 years out of date.
Right.
And it seems to me it's really curious. Why aren't people asking what is happening to Zimbabweans on a daily basis? I would love to know.
Right. Let's come to our questions and contributions from our audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ruvheneko, for this show that you're doing. My question is, I'm sure you've seen what's going on Twitter. I wouldn't speculate that there are people who are paid to change a narrative, but I'm sure you can see that the activity on Twitter right now, there's a lot of very new accounts whose business is to push a certain political narrative. And I would conclude that this is manipulative strategies going on online to create an image that people want to present to us, that we can carry it in our conscience and think this is reality. How does the Voice of Zimbabwe process shield against that? Because it's easy for anyone to sponsor, to shift that narrative using manipulative ways, and because we can then, anyone can use that to create a position in the media. How does Voice of Zimbabwe shield that?
Is for the people and by the people. So we, you know, the people involved in the process and the people who we are primarily giving the data to are the people that we're talking to.
Okay.
That data is for them first and then for everybody else next. It is purely to amplify citizen voices. It's purely to get people more engaged in the political process and in building the communities, that are strong and that are resilient.
Okay. Some comments that came in here on Facebook when I asked earlier before the program about people's feelings right now. Flo says, Zimbabwe is beyond repair. Corruption, greed, nepotism, and totalitarianism runs within our veins. We, as the younger generation, were socialized that way, and that's the only way we see these things are functioning, and that will never change. If you make me a leader, I'm going to make sure my family and friends are straight. As long as we are good, nothing else matters. If you're a policeman, we are taught every day you go home with at least $20. Everyone has that mentality, so we will never develop.
Well, you see, that's why it's interesting to have these kinds of conversations. I mean, that's a voice you wouldn't hear. This is a person who feels fairly despairing. Right? Depressed even, can't see a way to the future. But if you don't communicate with other people, so imagine you and your friends are all of that particular mind, what's the point in voting? What's the point of participating? What's the point of doing anything? You may as well forget it.
Right.
So the idea is to start the dialogue. I think it makes a big difference when you have a particular view and then you hear somebody else have a different view that's slightly optimistic and say, no, hang on, you didn't look at that. You didn't look at the fact that actually, you know, we are a very, very peaceful country. We may be, you know, a huge mess by all objective
Well, peaceful
standards.
again is relative.
Sure, you know, but
peaceful by whose standards? Because you'll ask other people that will give you a whole different narrative and experience of what Zimbabwe has been for them. And peace is not a word that comes to mind.
yeah. So what
We talk peace by extreme measures. Of course, we never had like all-out war,
right.
you know. But
so it's not Sudan or
No.
Somalia or whatever. So you know.
well, since 2000 at least,
yeah.
yeah.
So, right.
Or
So
1980.
So the point about it is trying to get dialogue
Yeah.
between people is important. If you want active citizens, the first thing you've got to do is to be able to speak. If you want people to march and participate, then they've first got to be able to express their voice. And I think that space is happening randomly, as you point out, through WhatsApp and Twitter, and everybody can say what they think, and a lot of what they have to say is not very helpful, and some of it's downright offensive.
Sure.
But couldn't we create a space first and foremost in which decent discussion happened? And maybe that will lead to people wanting to go to a community meeting. I'm encouraged by some of the responses of people saying, well, what I'm going to do 2018, I'm going to get involved.
Yeah.
So did they do that because they felt their voice was heard?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Comment here came in. This is Peñas Capisa. Doctors are striking and people are dying. And all you hear from our broadcasters is that a scarf has cost $15,000.
Yeah, that speaks to reliability of news and impartiality, by journalists. There's not much I can say about that other than our respondents also feel that journalists need to do better in terms of ethical standards.
Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, I think it's, I think we would like to see a really vibrant, active journalistic culture like you have in South Africa. I'd love to be able to see the kind of talk radio here in South Africa. It's very important for that.
Have you not listened to Capi Talk?
Yes.
Have you not listened to Star FM?
I
Where
have.
have you been, Tony?
I'm thinking of talk radio in Mzurubani. I'm thinking of talk radio deep in Gokwe. I'm talking about right across the country that people can tune in and they can hear Ruvheneko interview two people and they can agree or disagree with them.
On a certain issue.
Right, and I'd like to see journalists working really hard at investigative stories. You know, I think often, as a researcher, we send stuff out and they cut and paste what they think is interesting.
Right.
They don't pick up the phone and say, why did you do that? They just take a line out of it and what's that got to do with anything?
We got some more contributions from our live audience. Please do come up. And let's hear your contribution there. Doug Coltart, always in the house. You can't keep him quiet. You know what I mean? You just don't have him in the audience and think he's going to be quiet. So here, Doug's got a contribution now, so let's hear from that. And as we said, we are live with you for the next couple of minutes, so please do make sure that you stay with us. Okay.
Awesome. I just looked up the website to try and have a look at some more of the stuff, and I really encourage everyone to have a look at it. It's voicesofzimbabwe.net. There's some fascinating stuff there, and I just wanted to ask your guys' take on. There's one of the polls is all about the march, and there's a couple of striking things. One question is on why people marched. The vast majority of people were talking about demanding Mugabe's resignation, a bunch of other things. No one saying they came out to support the military, which was kind of the narrative that was pushed. This is because people love their military. Not at least from this data, not a single person made gave that reason. And then in terms of what Zimbabweans learned about themselves, the top three things that people said they learned. Number one was that we're a united people. Number two is that we're a peaceful people, which I think speaks maybe a bit to what Tony was saying. We've been through a lot of violence, but at kind of our core, we can be a peaceful people. And then the third one, which I really kind of would like you to hone in on a bit, is people say that from the march they understood that the people have power. So my question is how significant do you think the 18 November was? With all the background and all of it to it, but how significant was 18 November on the consciousness of Zimbabweans to realize that really what will affect change in our country is ordinary people getting active and kind of getting involved.
Sure.
I think for a large
Thanks, Doug. Sorry.
For a large part of our history, Zimbabweans themselves have been alienated out of the national narrative. So independence was given to us, right? We didn't collectively work for independence. Somebody came and freed us from colonialism, from quote unquote the British Empire, and so forth. A lot, there's even narratives about, for instance, Gukurahundi that are divisive. So it's Shonas versus Ndebeles. There's narratives about the people are powerless, and Grace Mugabe standing up and yelling essentially at people who we thought were powerful is the quintessential moment when you understood that I am no one. And she's yelling at Kazembe, for instance, who has all the power. Who am I then to be able to stand up against this system and this machinery? What the march did, I think, was show people that when we are many, we are able to speak and we are able to move and transform. And I think that is precisely the thing that people have learned, that people do have the power, that we do need to be united. And it's interesting even, you know, when people say that we are peaceful, because how we have not been at war since 1980, yet it's a notable thing that we can be at peace and we can unite peaceably. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, picking up what Doug is saying, I mean, for sure, if the army had said in November, December, don't go on the street, we wouldn't have. So, but they did, people did in their thousands. And what really struck me was they ended up talking to each other. Remember the statistic says, I'm frightened of what I say in public? Well, they weren't. They were talking and talking and talking and talking. So that was a very transformative lesson. Now, it could be put back in the box if the violence came back. But I think that what I heard develop afterwards, and I think it comes out in this little polling, is that people began to talk more and more and more. So voice began to happen. And that, I think, is a very, very different thing.
Dare I ask something? You said something. You said, if the army had not said go on the streets, you would not have. This is echoed across the board. Many people say that. They're saying, look, the hype of the march was there. We all knew there was a march on that date. But if the military hadn't said, we've got your backs, you're not going to get harmed, many people would have stayed at home and watched it on Facebook and on TV. So my question is, you say we found our voice. Have we really?
No, I think
Are we going to speak up again? Let's assume something happens within this new government, right? Like right now, doctors are marching, striking, which is terrible. It's terrible. And but it's under the new government, under the new dispensation, right? People are tweeting, some people are vocal, etc. It's a mess. There was the issue of leaked exam fees, again, under the leadership of the new dispensation, okay? I could go on and list many different things that have happened in this period. My point is, are Zimbabweans, did they really find their voice? How many Zimbabweans went and marched against any nonsense that's been happening in the new government? Are we still going to do that? Are we going to speak up against this new government right now? Or are we going to wait until the army says, oh, hey, we've got your back again? Have we really found our voice?
No, I think you're right. It's early days, okay? You know, after 37 years, and particularly the last 17, which have been really tough on public expression, you know, it's a bit like the populace's expectation that the economy would just suddenly be 1,000 flowers and everyone would have a job is unrealistic. But it's also unrealistic to think that, for example, 70% of the population is under the age of 35. That means all of them are born after independence and have grown up through a particular system. And for many of them now, it's the last 17 years. So they've expressed themselves a bit and they're expressing themselves some more. But I don't think you can build democracy quickly in that way. This is a beginning of those things. And
So nothing really happened in November. It was an event.
No, I think it is a process still, because I still hear that the space is more open. I think it's very interesting if you're on the streets or in the supermarkets. In the past, if I made a comment like, so, who's going to vote? People would go, hang on, you know, my vote's my secret. But now people will say, well, I like Chamiso or I like ED. Now, there is that conversation, and I can say to the person, why? And they give me an answer. So the space is opening. I think that's the first step of a change that will happen. It can go back very quickly if the repression and the violence comes back. I mean, we're risk averse as Zimbabweans, but we are, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that people saw soldiers and they saw tanks on the street, and I mean, people were dancing and taking photos with them, and you know, it was a wonderful moment in time, because ordinarily you're afraid when you see that, right? But it's one moment in time, and our history is long, and you know, I think the litmus test for us as Zimbabweans, and you know, for the new government, such as it is, will be the election. And I do think that, you know, as you rightly said, coming into the show, everybody is looking towards the 2018 election. What's going to happen? For instance, would the current government accept it if they lost the election? That's a good question, right? But again, it comes down to what citizens want and what they're articulating as their wants. They're not articulating one politician versus another politician. They're articulating jobs, unemployment, money, food, the basic necessities of life. And I think that anybody who is speaking to those issues is more than likely to motivate a vote for themselves.
Okay, let's come to our Facebook comments. I think this debate that we've just started about how open we really are and how big the strides we've taken into democracy really are. And democracy, I'm not sure, is even embedded in us as Zimbabweans sometimes. I really don't know. In 1980, we were liberated. That was a liberation struggle. But anyway, let's come to our Facebook comments. Inviolata Machova says, I think the voting system should be changed. People should be educated on why and how to vote. Too many political parties? Fine. Let there be a system that accommodates everyone. After all, we are all one people. Okay? Another comment from Heather Mason says, for now we are in a hopeless situation. Too many new political parties, zero policies. We waited for 30 plus years. We will wait for 5 more because I don't see anything good coming out of this election. Rush for power with no interest for the people at heart. There you go. So you touched on that, Tony. Thanks for bringing us here. Okay, you started this one with the idea of just too many political parties and, not any one that stands out. I'm curious from our audience here today, if you're dead set, you don't have to say who you're going to vote for, but are you certain about who you're voting for and are you looking forward to the elections? Is it something that you're going to be like, you know what, I can't wait for that date to be announced. I'm there, front row with my family and we're going to do this thing. Or are you still actually weighing out your options? Where are we?
Well, it's not too many parties. It's very interesting because many countries thrive on lots of political parties and they thrive extremely well on coalition governments. Nobody gets so Theresa May has to do a deal with, say, the Lib Dems or whatever it is, or in Denmark, centre-right and centre parties have to come together to do that. They often seem to produce much more stable systems. I think the most unstable systems, personally, are these two-horse races. I mean, for me, I'm watching the United States currently and thinking, wow. So you've got a minority president because of their fairly strange American system.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a horribly
it's
polarized
a very
country
strange
right
American
now.
system.
It doesn't feel nice at all. And what would happen if we had 3 political parties sharing a third each in Zimbabwe, and so you had to cut deals with each other?
Sure.
That might be much better, and maybe some of the little parties are going to be.
Don't call them little parties. That's not very nice, Tony.
Okay, sorry about that.
They think they're great.
No, I know, but my friend
Welshman
will get very upset for me saying he belongs to a little party.
I know what you mean.
But they may have a specific regional interest.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll win 2 seats in Mashonaland.
Maybe they just want representation. They want a voice. I'm pretty sure many of these parties in the race know that they're not going to get majority.
Sure.
They want a voice there, much like the independent candidates.
Right.
They just want a seat at the table and hope that they'll change
things. So then you
things.
end up with a parliament where 30 of the seats are by little parties or independents who are a rump, who now suddenly begin to change the nature of the way in which Parliament goes, as opposed to Team A versus Team B, because when Team A says yes, Team B has to say no. That doesn't feel to me very fruitful, actually.
Comment here from Ron Ald on Facebook. I guess it's Ronald. That was a non-event in the turn of politics as people marched for someone's interests. And this has got to do with, of course, us talking about what happened in November. And Zimbabwe, like we said, wherever you're listening from, what we're trying to establish in today's program is where our hearts and minds are as Zimbabweans, what we're placing interest on, what we're talking about, what we're involving ourselves in, and where we need to look forward to, because I think in understanding where we stand, we know where we're going. if our emphasis is largely on certain aspects of society, like I touched on earlier, if you've just joined us, there's certain elements that mean and ring true to most Zimbabweans in terms of areas of focus and interest. It's unemployment, it's the management of our economy, it's food shortages and famine, it's wages, income, salaries, it's water supply, education, poverty and destitution, corruption. So all these aspects are coming up, and it asks us, and it begs the question, where are we as Zimbabwe? Are we really getting anywhere near toward development if we still are just clamoring for the bare essentials? And the SDGs speak to this, and it's sad that most of them apply to Zimbabwe. There's some countries where the SDGs, probably only 1, 3, and 7 apply to certain countries, whereas for a country like Zimbabwe, 1 through to 17 are what we need in our country for development. So in all of that, with that in mind, as we wrap up our program this evening, I just think it's something we need to really think about as Zimbabweans and start talking more. And if you want to be part of this poll, if you want to be part of this polling system, if you want to get in touch with Voices of Zimbabwe or in touch with RAW, you can get in touch with them. They've got a website which is voicesofzimbabwe.net.
You can also join our respondent pool by sending a WhatsApp with your age, gender, and province to 0782 794 640.
Okay. And then to get in touch with RAW Research.
No, we're working with them.
So just better use one channel.
Just we want one channel.
One center of power.
Yes.
And what we have to not one center. But what we have to say to people is join.
Yeah.
Because this is not supposed to be transactional, as Ruvheneko said. What we really want are the questions being framed by the citizens that they want answered by themselves.
Yeah.
That's the dialogue that
Sure,
we're looking for,
sure.
right? We don't. It needs to be different to the classic polls about who do you vote for, why do you vote, etc., etc. We want to know what interests you and what questions do you want discussed amongst yourselves. Now, there might be political questions, but there might be totally different questions. It might be questions about religion. I don't know. There are many concerns for ordinary citizens, and we'd like to make that discourse wider and deeper.
Tony, if you'll allow me, I just want to ask you a question. As a white Zimbabwean, and you gave your age earlier, you are 66. In terms of what the needs are for you,
Me.
and we will say you being those in your age group, in your race, in your demographic, what are we saying are the needs of you versus the needs of someone like me?
Well, most of us are pensions, so we would probably like a pension.
Right, right.
But I would guess that my demographic seems to me is a lot of elderly folk who've lived here all their lives, who love living here, right? And
They just want to be at home.
they just want to be at home. I think very, very, very few would be active in the world. I think they're active within these small communities, and I think they're just like the rest of the demographic that we see in Zimbabwe, right? They belong to a church, they don't belong to a community group, they don't go to community meetings, they don't join others to raise a protest. But, a lot of white Zimbabweans were former Rhodesians, and they're a very mouthy lot, so I think they're probably not so afraid to express their view in public.
Okay, got you.
That might be the difference for the general demographic.
Yeah. And Ruvheneko, what does your generation, your demographic want and
Jobs.
need? Jobs.
Yes.
Okay.
Overwhelmingly, we just want jobs.
That financial security.
Yeah.
Of
also,
tomorrow.
a mortgage
Yeah.
would be nice.
When we talk jobs, we include all that. Because this generation got a mortgage by default. I'm sure your first jobs, you got that. You
Did
could
you get
buy a
mortgages?
house.
Yeah.
In your first 2 years of work, they owned cars, they owned houses.
Yeah, we've been slaving away for how long now? Can barely afford a car.
Yeah.
Can't buy groceries.
Yeah.
Jobs.
Jobs.
We want jobs.
All right. Well, Zimbabwe, each of us has a struggle. Whatever your struggle is, make sure that you identify yourself and place yourself. These polls are supposed to also be able to get you to find like minds, but it's also ultimately supposed to make you establish what you want and need from your next leadership. Now, we had a conversation on radio where we were saying, let's discuss the job description of our next president, right? Let's discuss what we expect out of our leader. When we put him on a platform on a world stage, what do we want him to articulate that represents us as Zimbabweans? These are the conversations that you can have amongst yourselves. Start having with your children, as young as they might be, even if they're 5 years old. Start talking to them about their country, about their leadership, about democracy. As we build toward elections, let's start being I'm even trying to find the word, I want to say stay woke, but I'm trying to find the actual politically correct term. But those that know what I'm saying. And I think it's important for us to understand where we stand and what we want and not be afraid to demand it. Let's not let November be an event. Let's let it be part of a process. And let's take our position in society and make sure that we get the outcome that we want and the outcome that we deserve. But thank you so much to you both for joining us tonight. Tony?
Thank you
And
very much.
Upenyu. Thank you so
having
much.
us.
I know Upenyu is a Nyati like me. She's a Mjari. What's your totem?
My totem, I'm not sure.
Out of the ones you know, just pick one.
Well, my ancestry is Afrikaner, so it's probably spread all the way to the Cape.
It could be anything.
It
could be anything. No, thank you so much. I want to thank Sonia's Events for our decor today. She set us up this beautifully. I want to thank the team behind the scenes, Jason, Dunstan, Jeff, Kulani and Dirk. Thank you so much, as always, for being there for us. And as I said, we are not gone. There'll be many more of these programs happening, but I have been a very busybody. I have started my new job, which has taken over my life in a lot of ways, but this is my life in a lot of ways. And I'm really sorry to those that do feel let down, but I am here and I'm not going anywhere. I've got a very exciting year ahead. So there's a lot of programming that's exciting, that's ahead. And if anything, do DM me as you always do. Some of you find ways to contact me quite aggressively and get your points across, but I'm very open to that and I'm open to your suggestions all the time. One great suggestion, of course, that always comes up, especially in the light of what's happened in the last couple of days, bring your father to the platform. No joke. Yes, he's my dad. Yes, I have him on speed dial, but he's actually not that easy to get on my platform because there's times where we separate dad and Minister of Health. So if you can help me lobby him, that would be fantastic. I would love to sit down with him too. But we will push for that because it's important. It's a very important dialogue. Too many lives have been lost and too much is going on for him not to speak to us. If he doesn't speak to me, let's hope he does give a journalist out there the platform and and give this issue the credence that it deserves. But that's it from me tonight. Thank you so much. Good night. Be good. And if you can't be good, be safe.